Hello and welcome to Inderes TV. We are initiating coverage of Herantis, and today I'm here with analyst Antti Siltanen to talk a bit about the company. So, Antti, could you explain what Herantis does?
Well, Herantis is a drug development company focused on neurodegenerative diseases, and at the moment Herantis is a kind of pure play Parkinson's disease company. So they have one asset called HERN096, HER, and that's an early stage drug candidate for Parkinson's disease. They have maybe options later on to expand into ALS and Alzheimer's disease, but at the moment the clinical development is purely focused on Parkinson's.
Okay, so this HER096, could you tell us a bit about how it works?
It's a disease-modifying drug candidate, meaning that it's aiming to stop the progression of Parkinson's. HER96 is administered under the skin once per week, and from there it crosses the blood-brain barrier into the central nervous system, into the midbrain, where is actually the site of action for the drug.
Okay, so drug development companies that have a candidate in the early development stage involves a lot of risk, of course. Are there any factors that mitigate the risk for Herantis?
Well, at this point, Herantis has undertaken a phase 1A study. So that means that the drug has been administered as single doses to healthy volunteers, and the goal of that study was to look at the kind of the optimal dosing of the drug and also some tolerability and safety of the drug as single dose. And then Herantis also monitored how the drug goes into the central nervous system, which is a kind of a very, very important step. And the results showed that it does penetrate the blood-brain barrier, gets into the central nervous system. So that's kind of a first de-risking step, and the fact that it's well tolerated at this point. So next, the company will kind of include people with Parkinson's disease into the next phase, and they will also look at the safety and tolerability in the phase 1B phase, which is the next one. And so that's kind of the stage where we're in. So there has been a little bit of de-risking, but then we have some major unanswered questions still before going to the market. So for example, long-term tolerability, long-term safety. So this drug could potentially be given to patients for several years. So we don't yet know what happens in the long term. And also in terms of efficacy, we need at least a phase 2 trial. So it will take 2 or 3 years before we get the first efficacy data. And probably there will be the phase 3 larger study which will then eventually produce the data of whether it's safe and effective enough to get to the market.
So first steps have been positive, but of course a lot to do still.
Exactly, yeah.
So what other drug candidates are there for Parkinson's disease being developed right now, and what, if anything, makes Herantis different from these possible competitors?
Well, there was a nice review published last summer, and according to that, in the Parkinson's landscape, there are roughly 60 clinical trials ongoing for Parkinson's disease. It sounds like a lot, but I would say that the number of kind of realistic drug competitors, the number is not so big. And at the moment, there are six drug candidates or let's say treatment candidates in the phase 3, the final phase, and I'd say that about half of those are not kind of realistic competitors. So the number of drugs at the late stage development is very small. There are candidates in mid and early stages, and some of those may develop into competitors and enter the market before Herantis can. But we'll have to see how that develops. But there are some candidates in the pipeline, but we'll see how it goes.
And of course, the prevalence of Parkinson's is quite high, so there's probably room for several different variations. For sure,
there will be probably subgroups within that Parkinson's population. So one drug may be more effective for a certain population, and there's certainly room for several drugs.
Yeah. So clinical trials in phase 2 and 3 especially require a lot of money. How far will Herantis' current funding carry, and what are the options for financing when they move forward in the studies?
Well, Herantis didn't or hasn't announced cash runway specifically, but our evaluation is that it would be until Q2 25, so about 1 year from now. And that should enable the company to take or undertake the phase 1b trial. And then there's the next step would be the phase 2 trial. It requires some preparation. I think the company is probably doing it already, but it will take some time to prepare for the phase 2. We estimate a small funding round to prepare for the phase 2 trial. And then Herantis aims for a partnership deal to fund the phase 2 trial and phase 3. So that's of course a very big unknown at the moment. So if they succeed in making that deal, and what would be the value of that deal, but that's the goal of the company, and it's an important step for funding the program and also for investors.
Yeah. So if at some point there's an announcement that they reached a partnership agreement, that's very good news then.
For sure,
trials. Yeah.
Depending on the value of the deal.
Of course. So if the drug candidate for Parkinson's disease passes all clinical trials, how likely do you think then a successful commercialization would be after passing all these phases?
Well, at this point the probability is pretty low because we are at the early stages. So as I mentioned, we don't yet know of the safety profile in the long-term administration and also the efficacy. We don't yet know it. So in preclinical trials it seems okay, but it's a very different game to bring it into people and Parkinson's disease patients. So the uncertainty of the commercialization is still really, really high at this point. It's an early stage company, so nothing specific about Herantis, but that's just the nature of drug development.
Yeah, so that's how the game goes. And
yes.
Yeah. And at what stage and how could Herantis then start generating profit?
Well, I think Herantis needs to undertake the phase 2 and phase 3 trials, and then there's some administrative processes at FDA and EMA. So we would estimate that the US commercialization would take place in 2032 and then in the rest of the world the next year. So it will take quite a long time still.
Okay. Thank you, Antti. So an interesting early development drug company that you can read more about in the report. Link below.